It's amazing what a little bit of suspension tuning can do, because the Toyota Corolla Altis has never really been that remarkable of a car to drive. But now that we have a facelift, and more importantly a GR Sport model, we've spent the last week and a half discovering that actually this might be the best handling C-segment saloon on the market. And before we get into that, be sure to hit subscribe and hit the bell to be notified every time we make a new upload. But ladies and gentlemen, this is our review of the Toyota Corolla GR Sport. Now, before we get into the uniquely GR stuff, we have to first cover the stuff that hasn't changed, which is under here. So underneath the bonnet, there is still the same 2-litre, 4-cylinder, naturally aspirated engine paired to a CVT automatic gearbox with 7 virtual ratios. There have been no changes to the ECU or the TCU, that's the engine control unit or the transmission control unit, so the powertrain remains exactly the same. However, it's about all the other things that you can't see that makes this car quite special. However, for the things that you can see, especially for the premium that this commands over the Toyota Corolla G, the GR Sport does have a few unique aesthetic features. So for starters, we get a unique front bumper with a much wider lower grille, which is very reminiscent of the GR Corolla. And on the side here, you get some fake air inlets, but they do a pretty good job at highlighting the width of this car, which I think does look quite smart. The LED fog lights live down here. You get full LED headlights with automatic high beam, which I certainly appreciate. And overall, the front end of this car does look quite menacing, if you ask me. Now, down the side, you can see that there is a set of black wing mirror caps. There are these little deflectors over the windows, and you get a set of unique 18-inch alloy wheels done up in a nice black color wrapped in Dunlop SP Sport Max tires. Now, the reason I bring up the tires specifically is because with this car's greater dynamic chops, obviously you want better grip and better performance, particularly through the corners, and these tires do a pretty good job. But overall, the side profile of this car hasn't changed because it didn't have to. I think that the Toyota Corolla was already a pretty good looking car, and now with a little bit more aggression in the form of this GR Sport model, I think it's just right. Now, at the back of the Corolla GR Sport, there is a little bit of confusion because here it says Corolla Altis, but then everywhere else, including the marketing material, it's called the Corolla GR Sport. So I'm not sure where that Altis name is supposed to go. But in any case, the back end of this car is just as neat as the rest of it, where you only have a subtle sort of lower bumper sort of diffuser-like element, and the GR Sport badging over there. There is nothing else to tell you that this is a GR Sport, which reminds me a little bit of really old BMW M cars, where it was very powerful but very subtle, although this car's not that powerful. Now, underneath this bonnet, you will find a pretty good amount of space. The Toyota Corolla was always known for having a good amount of practicality, and that extends into this current generation facelift model. Now, as standard, or rather they call it an optional accessory, but it comes with every car that's sold, you do get this boot liner, which covers this whole thing up in plastic, which means you can put more stuff in there. You can just wipe it out or just, spray it down with a hose if you want. Now, for those of you who are very, very interested, this car does come with a space saver spare wheel. It's not a Vios. Now, for the interior of the Corolla, I'm going to touch on the things that I don't like about it. Firstly, the passenger seat is manually adjusted, although the driver's seat is powered. And I just feel that at 152,000 ringgit, this ought to be powered. The other thing is, there is nowhere for me to put my sunglasses. Not here, not here, and there isn't even like a little pocket here where I could put it, which I do find a little bit irritating. Now, that done, everything else in this car is fantastic. Now, the thing about the Corolla Altis is that it surprises me at the level of quality in here. I think it's partly because Toyota understands that people who buy saloons in this segment now are choosing a saloon specifically over an SUV, and so they do need to be swayed and persuaded a little bit more, which is perhaps one of the reasons why the interior of this car is built to a degree that I haven't really seen outside of, well, a Camry. So for starters, the quality of materials in here is fantastic. This is soft touch, this is soft touch, there's fake stitching here, there's fake stitching here. This is soft touch. Even here, this is all sort of a nicely sculpted shaped plastic, although it is hard plastic, which is kind of what you want down here for durability. But the only bit of hard plastic that I can find in areas that you may touch is on this side underneath the driver's aircon vent. And this is partly because, again, you're not really going to be interacting with this. Passengers are more likely to touch and hold this and stuff like that. And of course, people in the showroom will be doing this a lot because Malaysians like to do that. And so everything that you touch in here is nice and pliant, which is nice. The other thing that's nice are these seats. So yes, the driver's seat is powered, the passenger seat is manual, but the seats themselves have been upgraded for this facelift model. And for the GR Sport, you get red stitching here, you get some red accents along the shoulders, and you have what appears to be a single piece headrest, but actually it is adjustable with GR badging embossed into it. And these seats are fantastically comfortable. Toyotas have always had particularly good ergonomics, but in this car, I think it's just nice because these seats are a perfect combination of being supportive, especially laterally, while still being very, very comfortable. And it has lumbar support, which the BMW 3 Series doesn't offer you. Now, this steering wheel is manually adjustable, which is fine because it is very adjustable indeed. And once you get it to just the right driving position, you can lock it into place, and then you realize that everything falls so easily to hand, including these paddle shifters to manipulate the 7-speed CVT automatic gearbox. Now, down here, you will find the electronic parking brake with the hold function. Up here, you'll find a wireless charger with a little clip to hold your phone in place so that even when you're driving enthusiastically, your phone doesn't go flying. And the wireless charger works great because the Android Auto and Apple CarPlay in this car is also wireless, which means that you can just put your phone here and everything works just fine. Speaking of the Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, I will note the fact that every time I've gotten into the car, it sets up so quickly that by the time the car's sort of warmed up or once I'm ready to drive, everything is booted up and ready to go, and the center screen is also very, very responsive, which means that there isn't any lag input even though you're running it on wireless. Now, down here there are a couple more buttons. You will find the traction control off button, which is, I suspect, a button that no one will ever touch, but next to it is the sport button, because obviously this is a GR Sport model, and so there are some sporty bits. But what amazes me about this is, aside from, sharpening the throttle and making the steering wheel a little bit weightier, the impressive thing with this is it also manipulates the digital instrument cluster, which I will get onto now. Because when you press the sport button, it changes the mode, obviously here, with this beautiful animation, which is not only crisp and pretty and fast, but it is a lot more than I expected from a Corolla. This digital instrument cluster, I think, is perhaps even more customizable than what you get out of a BMW. About on par with what you get with Mercedes-Benz, and I think that within the mass market it is again on par with what you get from the Ford Ranger, which I think is again incredibly impressive because this helps to lend the car a more upmarket feeling. And of course, when you click out of sport, it's got a little animation for normal as well, which I like a lot. Now, talking about this instrument cluster itself, like I said, it is very, very customizable. You have a central sort of rev meter in the middle, which you can change to 4 different theme settings. But more importantly, on the left and right of that meter, you can set it to various things like your trip, your average fuel consumption, trip A, trip B, as well as things like your adaptive cruise control and ADAS system functionalities, all displayed within this screen. And this is a fantastic example of a digital screen done right, because instead of frivolous and stupid graphics, it is functional while still being aesthetically pleasing. And so I really, really like that. And it's very easy to manipulate via the buttons here on the steering wheel, where on the left side that controls the screen, the right side controls your ADAS functions, and all the buttons on the bottom control your entertainment features. So overall, everything in the front is very positive. I really, really like being sat in here. Now, the back of the Corolla is also a very positive place to be because, again, quality in here is very, very nice. In fact, these armrests are nice and squidgy, and you still get sort of the red stitching here and the red stitching here and more red stitching on the backrest. And overall, like I said, everything back here is quite nice. Now, the seat base, which is something I talk about a lot, is actually nice and long, which means when I sit like this, I have very good under-thigh support. And just like the front seats, these seats are nice and soft, which means they sort of make you feel very comfortable while still maintaining pretty decent lateral support for what is ultimately a bench rear seat. Now with this seat setup in my driving position, I have a pretty good amount of knee room, although headroom is slightly tighter than I would have expected because I'm not exactly the tallest person in the world, but sat upright I still have pretty good room above me and it is very, very comfortable indeed. Now because I like to sit nice and low, there isn't that much space to tuck my feet in underneath the seat in front of me, but underneath the front passenger seat, which doesn't have height adjustment because it's manual, there is plenty of space. Now in terms of rear amenities, you do get some bottle holders here, you get some pockets here, you get a couple of crotch coolers down here, and you get a center armrest, which unfortunately does that. See, I would have preferred if it just sort of stopped here, because also height-wise this is about right, but instead it just sort of... Now you don't get sun blinds on the side, although you'll struggle to find a C-segment saloon that does, but you do get a sun blind out the back. It is manual, unfortunately. I would have preferred this to be powered, but if I wanted a powered rear sunblind, I should have bought a Camry. Now, in terms of the rear accommodations, I will say that the ISOFIX mounts here are pretty easy to locate and there's no stupid cover on it, which means it should be easy for you to put a child seat in and out. However, the doors do not open as wide as I would have liked them to, which means a bulky rear-facing child seat is going to struggle somewhat to find some space in here. And of course, the design of these seats, which kind of curve backwards quite a bit, also means that a rear-facing child seat is most likely going to push up against this seat, which means for the driver, you should be fine because you'll be sitting a little bit closer to the controls, but behind the passenger seat, you might have a little bit of a problem. Now, mercifully, although there are no sunblinds on the side, these cars do come as standard with Toyota safety and solar tint, which means it does block a good amount of UV rays, so it should keep children back here pretty alright. But I've waffled on quite a bit about the things on this Corolla that are standard, because ultimately this is a Corolla GR Sport, which means it is all about the drive. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are no powertrain changes to the Corolla GR Sport, which means you still get that very reliable 2-litre naturally aspirated 4-cylinder with power going to the front wheels via a 7-speed CVT automatic gearbox. Now, while that may not sound all that exciting, particularly given the fact the Honda Civic RS is available with either the EH-EV hybrid system or indeed the 1.5-litre turbocharged petrol setup, again, as I mentioned earlier, with Toyotas, it's all about the drive. And so driving the Corolla GR Sport reveals quite a few things. Firstly, this new suspension tune and setup is something that is very clearly made for drivers and for driving enthusiasts. I say that because the suspension setup has been revised, so now the spring rates and damping rates are slightly sharper, they are slightly firmer, while still not compromising overall ride quality. Now this is very similar to the Vios GR Sport, another car that we found that once it received the GR Sport treatment became a much better vehicle as a result. Now in this, the changes are a lot less pronounced because, as I mentioned earlier, there are no changes to the powertrain. Instead, what you get is, again, this fantastic ride and handling. So for starters, as I mentioned, the steering is now ever so slightly different compared to the standard Corolla as a result of that updated suspension. And so it feels a lot more pointed, a lot sharper, a lot more precise and accurate when you're driving it around. The inputs translate in such a way that is very natural and very predictable, something that keen drivers will be able to notice and appreciate quite quickly. And then when you pair that with the upgraded tires on this car, which are far higher performance and provide fantastic grip, particularly in the dry, but still do pretty well in the wet, it gives you a lot more confidence to chuck this car around. And that is what brings us on to the suspension and to the handling part of things. So because they've updated the damper and spring settings, it means that this car now does not have as much body roll as the regular car does. It was very well controlled as it stood, but now in this it's even better still. And as a result, this car gives you the confidence to chuck it around corners, to take it through some really challenging conditions, because it will reward you. And it doesn't do so at the cost of anything else. So for starters, the powertrain, although a little bit lackluster, is still pretty responsive. And that is, of course, the benefit of having a naturally aspirated motor versus a turbocharged one. Because yes, a turbocharged motor will produce more power and produce more torque, but a naturally aspirated motor will always give you the immediacy that you want, which I find is usually a little bit more important and a little bit more valued when it comes to driver-focused vehicles. So when the mood takes you and you find those lovely twisty B roads and you decide that it's time to let the GR Sport half of this car shine through, it really does reward. There is very, very little body lean in this car. Whatever little that you do feel is just there to let you know that the body and the weight is moving around. And it invites you to sort of lean into that weight and lean into the corner as a result. It does give you a degree of confidence. And because those tires are so high performance, the levels of grip available mean that you will likely never find the furthest end or the limits of these wheels, particularly with the powertrain that doesn't invite you to look for it in the first place. And what that creates is ultimately this very harmonious, very balanced driving experience. And from the driver's seat, it is something that you appreciate almost immediately. But ultimately, this is also a Corolla, which means this needs to be comfortable and practical and refined. And you would think that by making this a GR Sport car, it must come with some compromise in that department. But it doesn't. Driving this around feels so wonderfully balanced because, again, when you're just driving it like I am now, calmly, serenely, just trying to go about your business, you will find that in terms of rolling refinement, there is a little bit more noise from the wheels than you get from the standard Corolla, but there is still a pretty well suppressed amount of wind noise. Very little of it gets into the cabin. And in terms of the insulation around the car, it does mean that, again, life in here is very serene indeed. It's not until you get to about 130-ish that it starts to get a little bit noisy, although you shouldn't be driving at those speeds anyway. But even at a high cruise on the motorway, for example, thanks to this beautiful ride setup, it means that it feels very, very confident at speed when you're on the motorway trying to cover as many miles as you can. And thanks to that insulation, thanks to these comfortable seats, everything just feels nice and polished. This is, of course, aided further by the fact that the new Corolla now comes as standard with active safety systems. So, for example, this Corolla GR Sport comes with Toyota Safety Sense 2.0 or Safety Suite 2.0, which essentially means that you have radar-guided cruise control with autonomous emergency braking and traffic jam assist, blind spot monitoring, a 360-degree camera, rear cross traffic alert, and all that sort of nonsense. All the things you'd expect to find on a modern family car. And what that means is, again, when you're not in the mood to drive like your arse is on fire, you can just switch on the radar-guided cruise control and the car will glide you through traffic jams and so on with no issue at all. Of particular note is the fact that this car comes with lane tracing assist, which means that it will help you to sort of steer and stay within lane. But on top of that, the lane tracing assist system in this car with the adaptive cruise control means that when it detects that you're going into a corner, it will actually slow the car down in a very natural fashion so that you go through the corner a little bit slower and then it will power you out of it. Which means, again, on the motorway, it makes life in this car very serene indeed. So, going back to what I said at the beginning of this review, do I think that this is one of the best handling C-segment saloons in the market? I definitely think so. Yes, the Honda Civic is a lot more popular, largely down to that powertrain. But if you ask me, the Civic RS in particular, which I have driven in my own time, is a little bit less refined and it's not quite as polished a presentation as this. There's something about the Toyota Corolla that just feels like Toyota really put in a lot of effort to ensure that all of the major touch points, all the major interaction points in this car are done in such a way that you really cannot take issue with it. Because in the last week and a half that I've had this, I have struggled to find anything about this car that I would describe as a deal breaker. And that is in addition to the fact that I think that this car drives really, really well. Sure, some of you may say that if you want to drive this car, buy a sports car, buy a hot hatch, and that is true. But for some of us, like me, we either need cars that can do more than just one thing, or more importantly, we want a car that can feed our need to drive while also still being able to do other things. And so I think that the Corolla GR Sport provides that perfect balance between a practical family saloon and a very sharp, very enjoyable, very rewarding driver's car. And all of this for less than 160,000 ringgit, I think is a fantastic deal. And of course, I also think it looks good, but that's a matter of personal preference. Now, that said, if you want a car within this segment that drives very, very well while still not compromising particularly on fuel economy, or you want better fuel economy out of your car, then you'll most likely be better served by something like the Honda Civic RS EHEV. That hybrid system is very, very efficient in town, and because of the way it works, it means that you really don't consume that much when you're driving through traffic and so on and so forth. But if you want what I think might be a little bit more polished, a little bit more refined, and a little bit more upmarket, and quite a bit more expensive, then consider the Mazda 3 Saloon, which I also think is a very, very good, very polished, very balanced sort of car. Although I think that the Corolla GR Sport is actually better to drive. Although if you're one of those people who don't like CVTs, then I suppose the Mazda 3 is the natural choice for you. But the bottom line is the Corolla GR Sport is a much better car than you would ever assume it to be. And I am so happy this car exists because it means that Toyota remains steadfast in their commitment to make fun cars. In any case, that has been our review of the Toyota Corolla GR Sport. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to be notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We will catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe and jangan bodoh.